We're not creating anything, not in the truest sense. What we are doing instead is expressing. We're not creating, we are expressing. We are expressing that which we are identified with. This is the secret. All right, welcome back to another episode of Daily Neville. I am your host, Josiah Brandt. Daily Neville is a daily show all about breaking down the teachings of Neville Goddard, making them easy to understand, easy to digest, easy to apply in 20 minutes or less. Today we are continuing with episode 16. This is chapter 16 of The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. And chapter 16 is a very short chapter, and it is titled Personal Impotence. It would seem that this is a rather simple concept to translate and to transmit, as Neville invested about a half a page into this chapter titled Personal Impotence. We're going to go ahead and dive into it together, and we're going to break it down and make sure that we understand our personal impotence. Neville writes, self-surrender is essential, and by that is meant the confession of personal impotence. All right, so what is impotence, right? So if we think about it, what is potency? Potency, right? Potency, I'm not giving you the dictionary definition, but if I were to, someone asked me, what does it mean to be potent? It means to be powerful. It means to be effectual. It means to be effective, right? If something is potent, that means you have to be careful of its power. It's a very effective tool. A potent tool is an effective tool. Something that has potency, a potent medicine, is dramatic in its effects. So what is impotence, right? It's a lack of power. It's a lack of effectiveness. It's a weak medicine. An impotent medicine would be a weak or unable to perform medicine. So self-surrender, Neville is saying, is essential. And he says, what he means by this idea of self-surrender is he means a confession of personal impotence. So this is about the ego. That's what he means when he's talking about personal impotence. He's talking about the ego. And he's saying the ego can accomplish nothing. The ego is impotent. The ego cannot perform. The ego is a weak or ineffectual medicine. It can't do anything. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper here and see exactly what Neville says about personal impotence. In quotes, he writes, I can, of mine own self, do nothing. I can, of my own self, do nothing. This is the little self, right? So my little personality ego, right? The little me can do nothing. The little me is ineffectual. Little me is impotent, right? Neville writes, since creation is finished, it is impossible to force anything into being. Since creation is finished, it is impossible to force anything into being. The example of magnetism previously given is a good illustration. You cannot make or force magnetism, just as you cannot make or force creation. Magnetism is displayed. You cannot make it. It is displayed. Now, if you remember, he was talking about the particles or the atoms in steel. And when they're demagnetized, they're just kind of all facing different directions. But when the electrons of the atoms, molecules of steel, are marshaled in ranks, the arrangement of the substance, when they're marshaled in ranks and they're in alignment and they're coherent, they display a property known as magnetism. Neville writes, you cannot make the law of magnetism. You can only display it. If you want to build a magnet, you can do so only by conforming to the law of magnetism. No amount of efforting or exertion of personal willpower will force magnetism. You cannot make magnetism. You cannot create magnetism. You can only display magnetism by conforming to the law that is magnetism. In other words, Neville writes, you surrender yourself or yield to the law. In like manner, when you use the faculty of assumption, you are conforming to a law just as real as the law governing magnetism. Now, we know the law that governs magnetism because we have explored it. We have studied it scientifically, right? We've really gone deep into discovering what the law of magnetism is. And Neville writes here that the faculty of assumption also conforms to a law. So when we are using the faculty of assumption, remember the power of assumption is the creative power, the creative power. Assumption is the creative power. This is also why a lot of people prefer LOA to be an acronym for law of assumption rather than law of attraction. Law of attraction is kind of an impotent version of the law of assumption. We're not attracting anything. We're assuming. That's the truer way to say it, the more aligned or coherent way to describe the properties of what is actually happening. It is through the law of assumption that things are selected from the creation that is already finished and all that already exists. You can neither create nor change the law of assumption. In this respect, you are impotent. Because you cannot create or change the law of assumption. It just simply is. It just simply works. That's what it is. It's a law of this universe. Because you cannot change or affect it or make it or force it or create it. That is why you are impotent. You are impotent in front of the law. You can only yield or conform. Become coherent with, act in harmony with the law of assumption. You can only yield or conform. And since all of your experiences are the result of your assumptions, consciously or unconsciously, the value of consciously using the power of assumption surely must be obvious. I'm going to read that again. You can only yield or conform. And since all of your experiences are the results of your assumptions, consciously or unconsciously, the value of consciously using the power of assumption surely must be obvious. So what he's saying is all of your experiences are the result of your assumptions. And that is why the law of assumption is incredibly powerful. And the value of consciously using and applying the law of assumption is incredibly valuable. Willingly identify yourself with that which you most desire, knowing that it will find expression through you. We're not creating anything, not in the truest sense. What we are doing instead is expressing. We're not creating, we are expressing. We are expressing that which we are identified with. This is the secret. This is the one secret. Yield to the feeling of the wish fulfilled and be consumed as its victim. Then rise as the prophet of the law of assumption. Neville, the mystic Shakespeare. Yield to the feeling of the wish fulfilled and be consumed as its victim. Then rise as the prophet of the law of assumption. I have a prompt for you. What are you assuming yourself to be? What are you aligning with? Using the faculty of assumption, using the power of assumption that it may express itself through you. One sentence, comments below, drop it, give the gift to yourself, your future self, and all of the others who will read your comment. One sentence. What is expressing itself through you now? Tap the thumbs up button to help others find this important teaching about the power of assumption, and subscribe to this channel so that you get Daily Neville tomorrow. That's all for this episode, episode 16, Personal Impotence. Imagine wisely, my friends, and I will see you in the next.